As a reviewer, it's important to recognize your flaws and be cognizant of them going into a review. That there are some cases that despite your best effort, you may have issues in covering a specific type of game or a particular subject matter due to your bias. Even when the game is published by a company that you've seen the quality of before, that you may struggle to come to a conclusion both in the positive or negative direction. In the case of The Princess, The Stray Cat, and Matters of the Heart, two elements that I find hard to objectively evaluate were present here: romance and comedy. Nevertheless, the visual novel developed by Tokyo Toon and published and translated by Fruitbat Factory, released on June 17, 2019 on Steam and cost $19.99. But before I begin this review, this key was obtained from the publisher, Fruitbat Factory, for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? So, let's just start with the basics of the story. You are Nora, your prototypical middle-of-the-road high school student with no distinguishing features or talents, aka male protagonist. He's just on his way to yet another boring school day when he comes across the asleep Patricia in the park. Little does he know at the time that Patricia is a princess of the underworld, who's sort of trying to bring death to the living world. But considering how actual life ends up draining her energy in ways that she doesn't really expect, Nora helps her out, and thus leads to a new friendship and absolute insanity. In the first few hours of the story, Patricia finds out several elements of the living world that sparks her magical interest, such as the Vital Grimoires, which of course are porno magazines. But food, relationships, and general curiosity end up keeping her and her sisters, who have followed her from the underworld, into a weird series of magical events, learning, and of course, romance. But of course, you can't do that without a series of ladies to serve as the routes for the romantic portion of the novel. This includes the class monitor Michi, the social butterfly Yuki, and the not actually a sibling, yet is, Sachi. There's other minor characters such as the tough Nobuchina, the sweet Yuki, yes, another Yuki, and the dumbass Koki. Then, a certain event happens that changes the life of Nora forever, our main protagonist, in a way which he must overcome or cause a real life-changing alteration to his daily routine. Now, you may note that I'm being very, very generic about this, and there's a reason for that. I'm not willing to spoil this event because it's not spoiled in any trailers directly, and I think it's important to discover for yourself because it does have an effect on exactly what you think of the game, at least in my opinion. Shortly after this event, this is where the game takes a pretty clear branching path to select the lady you want to romance, and the amount of decisions within the game are pretty minimal. This is pretty much it. You'll get ones here and there to see some side stories called musings, but other than that, you make one or two selections and that's the route you go down. But it's done well in terms of the presentation, as the illustration and artwork is nice to look at, but it is a bit of what you'd expect of a visual novel of this price range. Stereotypical elements of manga-type styles are here, with large irises in the eyes, school uniforms with a focus on detailed hair work. Expressions are exaggerated, from blush in reaction to something touching, to Yuki's "I'm gonna cause some real trouble" face, which is one of my favorites in the game. The backgrounds, in contrast, strictly fall into the area of realistic, even for the underworld sections, which that's okay, but they aren't supposed to take your attention away from the main writing, which is what the game wants you to focus on. Let me be clear, this is storytelling through and through, and yes, visuals help, but this is all about the writing. So let me talk about the writing, shall I? The thing is, the writing is inconsistent, but that's not necessarily a bad thing in this case. The humor, for example, can be a little bit off the wall, and a little bit all over the place, to be honest with you, making science jokes in one scenario, and then completely going bonkers and going slapstick in another. It can actually at times feel like you are getting different writers with the different girls at each point, but that's something I caught myself before making that deduction here. See, each of the routes end up going for a little different flavor of humor and storytelling to play with the characteristics of each girl, which I actually do really like about the game. Despite the fact that there are similarities between the girls in terms of the looks and the styles, the thing is, each of them are really different in terms of your experience with them. And I frankly love the fact that it almost felt like 4 or 5 different visual novels in the same world. I don't see that a lot with these kind of stories, at least in my opinion. Usually they're grounded to 2 or 3 basic routes, and yeah, there may be more girls, but they start to feel similar over time. Not the case here. For example, let me take my second favorite route of the novel, Yuki's. Her backstory plays a lot into the character that she has become over time, a hard worker social butterfly who relies on her friends for support, but is always there to support them back when she's needed. She's a little looser on the moral side, but it plays into her personality well, and her connection with Nora a tiny bit too. She works a few odd jobs, but the main one is the cat cafe, which of course is the main setting for her scenario. Yuki is a prime example of how all the protagonists here are relatable, and all the scenarios are relatable as well, even when magic and the underworld is involved. It doesn't matter that you may not have been friends that she falls into in terms of class categories, or that you don't fit into the social structure she ends up being in your real life. The writing breaks the characters down into more relatable characteristics that it focuses on. Things as kindness, jealousy, hopefulness, and self-doubt. I was incredibly impressed with the writing here because of that. Yuki's the type of character that I would normally find to be annoying, or one that I would have absolutely no interest in, but the writing and the translation did such a good job in making her relatable that I wanted to finish her story even when I was going to bed for that evening. On top of that, it's things like the weight put behind the more negative experiences with each character. Most of the time, what I see from romantic comedies is that you have a hump to get over in terms of a relationship, but really, when you look at it in the big picture, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, at least for the bad ones that I've had. This one is right in the middle in terms of being reasonable in terms of what you have to deal with, but on the other hand, reasonable to get the emotion out of you as well. It's all grounded in reality, but these characters, they feel real because of it. They feel like something that you actually have to deal with. Now, usually the fact of the matter is that you pick one character for a route, and it usually focuses on that character, with the other characters showing up here and there. But what I liked about Stray Cat was that even when you picked a specific route, other characters did play legitimate parts in terms of helping you out or trying to be there when there was a huge event. They didn't just fade into the background, making the group feel like a cohesive friend unit as opposed to people just hanging out for the sake of hanging out with each other. But let me address one of the biggest criticisms I'm seeing of the game at this point, and one that I didn't necessarily realize until I sort of started to piece things together. See, I struggled with some of the review in terms of the game, and one of the reasons for that was I felt like there was something missing from the game. Like I mentioned, some of the comedy elements of the game can feel very all over the place, but there were some plot points that suddenly disappeared and reappeared at later times that didn't feel right. I couldn't help but think that certain serious plot points ended up having elements that were not resolved, or resolved a tiny bit strangely. And I think I know why. From the get-go, the game feels a lot more sexual than other novels that you may have played on Steam. And yes, I know, there's 100 of them, and a lot of them have fan service, a lot of them have sexual elements. But from the get-go, something feels a little bit different for this one. Well, there's a reason for that. See, in Japan, this game is a visual novel. A hentai visual novel. AKA, it's a pornographic visual novel. If you do a search on the game, you will actually find that out on its Wikipedia page. And if you search for the images, yeah, you will find them. Hence the dilemma in this review. On one hand, there's definitely segments missing from the story, and I feel like I can really see that within the storytelling. You don't want to cut the original work in a way where you feel like you are taking that content out for no good reason. And the fact is that we're seeing this more and more lately in other games, and especially on the Sony platform. And I get that argument, I really do. And 99% of the time, I'd be right there arguing in terms of the cut content for this game, especially if it hits the heart of the work. And to be honest, I really wish there was a way for people to patch for those who wanted that content in the game. Hence why this next statement may surprise my viewers. I think the decision to make the game non-adult only was a reasonable one in this case. In my mind, even when looking at the possibility of the adult content, it's actually not the biggest strength of the game. It's still a strength, but not its biggest strength. That's based on pure conjecture, however, based on the writing style and the scenes seen via Google, and extending that writing style into erotic elements, at least in my head. Sure, there's still sexy shots in the game present here. You will get panty shots, you will get those sexualized shots. But the meat of the game is still present here. And to me, the meat is the ability to connect with those audiences and the strength of the character writing that are more important than the erotic elements, even if I don't know what those erotic elements are entirely. I understand I'm taking a leap of faith here, but this is solely based on the strength of those characters. If it were a bit weaker, I wouldn't be advocating for this. It's the sentimental and emotional moments that put the game into the 1% scenario that I mentioned before. This is the thing. Somehow the game made the erotic phrase, "you'll make me pregnant," which is present in a lot of hentai manga, an endearing phrase by the end of one of the stories. I'm still unsure how this happened, and whether it's a mastery of writing or some sort of hypnosis embedded in the words. But that should tell you the strength of some of the moments in the game, and how well they end up working. The route that I think that shows this the most may actually surprise those who have played the game. It isn't Patricia's route. I see a lot of people say that this is the best route, and I think it's great, but don't get me wrong, it's not the best one. The one that made me think it had the best writing, the one that made me absolutely fall in love with the game, was the first one I did, Michi's route. Now, another confession here. There's a reason why Michi's route hits home with me in particular. Michi is a female version of me. Between the uptight and proper nature, while being taken back by real-life sexual talk. In addition, the major event that plays out through her route is something I've dealt with most of my life. To see this character, one that I immediately related to, felt like I was part of at that point, and have her deal with the problems that I've struggled with, and the emotion that came out of it, that was the best part of the story by far. I will openly admit, within Michi's route, I cried 3 or 4 separate occasions. That doesn't happen that often in games for me. Sure, I tear up, but not that often in one specific route. It's the ability for the game to show Michi's vulnerabilities and what she goes through that really excels. The fact is that you want her to succeed and overcome her problems because, well, you feel like you've gone through them as well, even if they aren't necessarily the format in which is shown in the game. You root for her because she is the heroine, despite the fact that, well, she actually isn't the main hero, but nevertheless. What emphasizes all of that, and what drives the game's emotion at its heart, is the voice acting. The voice acting is only in Japanese. but you immediately get the tone and the emotional beats that the game throws at you. And almost every single voice actor's range here is absolutely amazing. Whether it be a purposely bad yet comical rendition of a vice principal doing a celebrity impersonation by Koki, or Sachi's kudere performance with the idea that she could break that any moment, the performances here are masterful. The best two in my mind of course, the two routes that I love the most, Michi and Yuki's. Michi's uptight nature, when paralleled with her panic getting into slightly erotic situations, hits a fantastic range of emotion, and her confession towards the end of the game is one of the best ones I've seen in a modern-day visual novel. Meanwhile, I was really impressed with Yuki's more reserved talking when revealing her feelings that almost goes against her popular cheery attitude, but made sense for the character. Everyone has such an incredible range in terms of emotion, in terms of those pitches, and I'm putting those characters' names on screen and the ones voice actors that I think you should follow, because I will be looking for their other work. They are that good in this game. Just take a listen and see what I'm talking about. Actually note, to make sure that I don't spoil anything with one of these voice lines that I'm going to show you, I will not let you see what the actual translation is. I want you to just hear the emotion within the voice of the character, because it puts down the emotion and the feelings without even having to read a word of text.
どうした田中ちゃん。エンターキーを見てたら涙が出てきて、あんなに全部を背負ってるなんてすごく大変だなって思って。
泣くなよ田中。
元気出せ田中ちゃん。ミル貝のお刺身ってなんかエッチじゃないっすか。見ろこの能天気さ。
救えねえぜ。
そういう野口も新ジャンルおはよう型ヒロインごっこしようって言ってたじゃないっすか。おはようおはようおはようおはようおはようおはようおはようおはようおはようロッパオン。こちらこそおはよっとサーバー。あなたのことが好き。寝ても覚めても好き。あなた以外のことなんて考えられない。男子の中でも一番好き。ずっと好き。超好き。一緒に手つなぎデート。あとキスもしたい。寝てるあなたにキスをして、まずはほっぺ、次におでこ、耳かき休憩を挟んで次に唇、そして舌と舌がちょっとぶつかるなんていう大人なキスもあなたとだけ試したいです。だからどうか私と付き合ってください。私の一生ものでいてください。ちょっと待ってずるいよ。なんで私だけ置いてくのさ。ユウ、
地上は危険だ。ユウ、お前は留守を頼む。
でも冥界が危ないっていうのに黙って家にいるなんてできないってば。それに肉まんだかあんまんだか美味しいだかそんな話されたら見て食べて勉強しなきゃ損。
As for the music, there's nothing too special about the music here, and yet for some reason, a theme or two did get stuck in my head. It's like the elements of the visuals as I mentioned earlier. It is a good complement to the writing, but doesn't necessarily stand out, and it's not supposed to. Take a listen and see what you think.
ですがもしこのことを黒木さんの女性ファンに知られるなら、黒木さんには多くの隠れファンが存在しているのをご存知ですか。もし彼女たちに知られればあなたはさて、今日は新しい仲間が増えた。こんにちは。
One other note to make here is the options menu. I mean, wow, there's a ton here for a visual novel, and that's really nice to see. You could choose fonts, skip speed, resolution, borderless and windowed. I mean, look at all the options that I'm going through for this visual novel. You don't expect this, but come on, that's impressive. In the end, The Princess, the Stray Cat, and Matters of the Heart is a surprise out of left field for me, and how effective it was telling a story that I could relate to, even with the insanity that came from some of the situations. It's remarkably down to earth in how it could get reactions out of you despite that aforementioned insanity, and the characters, while having stereotypical elements, end up being just a bit outside of those tropes, enough to make them feel unique. The voice acting shines, and while it's not on the level of a game like Valhalla, it's just under it, coming in at a 92 out of 100, making it a must-buy, even if you're hurting for cash. But like all reviews on this channel, that is more of my objective-based score. In addition to that, there's my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of games and puts them into score elements for buyability purposes. If you fall strongly into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, then refer to this chart to see where the game lies on the buyability range for you. Now, I make a special note with the enhancers and this game in particular. Again, my main score is designed to be as objective as possible, but I will admit something. With the comedy and the romance elements, I can't necessarily say that it is entirely objective in terms of that. Of course, nothing is objective 100%, but I do my best to minimize certain elements. I had problems disconnecting those elements here in terms of my personal preferences, so keep that in mind. Get a review or two under your belt in terms of if you want to buy this game, and specifically the ones in the description below. I don't want you to read reviews that spoil certain elements of the game that I've seen. Coming up next on the channel should be the Zenki Zero Last Beginning review. Yeah, I know. I took some reviews that came on and had time sensitivity, but I am still working on this review. I'm on stage 8 of 8, and there is a lot to go through here. And to say that I've enjoyed it would be making a little bit of an understatement. There will be more indie investigation streams coming, and I will continue the laid-back Yakuza 0 and Bloodstain laid-back streams. But the laid-back streams will be only public on the channel for a week, then will be added to that game's playlist afterward unlisted, so it doesn't flood the played video feed. You can find those playlists, though, on the main part of the channel. Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out for now, and as always, keep on gaming. Or in this case, keep on enjoying stories. Because this one is one of the best ones of the year.